Hi, Scott. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session today. And let's do another raise of hands. Am I too loud? Sometimes people can't hear me, which is kind of unusual because I'm pretty loud anyway without a microphone. Um, I love it when Scott says a quarter of a century. It makes you sound a lot older than you really are. But I have been there 27 years, and in my paths around the world, I have learned quite a bit from our clients about successful and unsuccessful strategic planning. And today is some of the lessons learned and some education that hope you could pick up about it. As always, if you stay to the end, there will be some a reward for some of you. We will give away books as we always do, or something close to that, but they'll tell you more about that if you stick around to the end. Now, I notice some of you actually get on early and you say you're sticking around to the end, but you're probably doing something else, so you actually stay attentive to the end. We can watch you. We see what's going on. Today's topic was picked by Scott and Pete from Duran, and they come up with these clever titles. Then I have to figure out what the secrets are. So I get to put all the information together about what the title is. And for those of you who remember the Beatles, I start off with what you might have thought was a Beatle written song, but it's actually done by Billy J. Kramer, who was one of the Beatles' idols who came out before the Beatles. So for those of you who like old rock and roll tidbits, there you go. And when you see these three signs again, you'll know that we are getting close to the end of the presentation, and we will share those secrets with you. As Scott said, I've been with Duran 27 years, and I still conduct quite a few seminars and workshops and consulting and helping organizations not pick their strategy, but align their initiatives to the strategy. And that's what this topic is about. But for us to be able to do that, I want to give a little bit of background about why this is important. One day Alice came to a fork in the road and saw a Cheshire cat in a tree. "Which road do I take?" she asked. His response was a question. "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know," Alice answered. Then said the cat, "It doesn't matter." For those of you who don't remember that from Alice in Wonderland, it is a statement that is very important to why this session even exists and why you need to do strategic planning. If you don't have some long-term plan, and that might only be 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, but if you don't have a long-term plan, then whatever you're doing now is probably pretty good or pretty bad because you don't know where you're going, so any road will lead you there. But most successful organizations have some form of a strategic direction and a set of plans or guiding principles to get there. And for our sake here, we want to think of a strategic plan as a guide to where we're headed, a set of targets we're trying to achieve, or even simply a set of goals that we're trying to accomplish over a longer term. If we think of a World Cup soccer, or as you might call it, a football game, which has two very long periods, the tactics or the short-term plan is to get through every minute quickly and try to make positive accomplishments. And the strategy might be to wear down the other team and take them in the final minutes. Your strategy might be to relax and let them take advantage of you, wear them down. But the strategy is what we're going to do to get to the win. And so we could think of things in short term and long term. So when we talk about strategy, we are thinking about a longer term plan. The reason for today's topic is that in our travels and in some of yours, and probably by the popularity of this webinar, we find organizations are not very successful at achieving their strategy. And interesting, in a Fortune magazine, there was a statement that they estimated 70% of the organizations who don't, it's not because they picked a bad strategy, it's because they didn't execute it well. And when we talk about alignment, we are talking about the deployment and execution process. And so if only 10% of strategies effectively are executed, that's a pretty big gap. And it also is one that we see when we visit organizations. Now, there are many successful strategic deployments, and there are many organizations who are successful at achieving long-term goals. So the organizations in that 10% may be few, but it doesn't mean they don't get to some portion of their strategy. Matter of fact, a strategy, like any kind of planning activity, is looking into a crystal ball, looking at numerous variables and trying to make sure that we actually can manage those variables to get to some better performing level at some future state and some future time. But we also have seen that bad execution is often the result of poor alignment of resources and infrastructure. And that's what alignment's about. It's about getting the resources and the infrastructure aligned so that you can carry out those goals. Often, leaders assume that the goals will just be deployed through the functions and the departments. But as many of us process people know, that a customer gets their service or product as it flows across these functions. So a lot of times the structure, the organizational structure, is not the right structure to deal with those cross-functional issues, so therefore you have to establish an infrastructure to do that. So let's get a quick definition here of strategic planning. It's the organization's process of defining its longer-term direction and making decisions on allocating its resources to pursue that direction. In other words, it's a set of aimed-at targets with some cascading direction to the units, to the departments, which contain targets that they want to achieve. And as we progress through our presentation, we'll define strategic planning as we did, strategic alignment, strategic deployment. So give you a pause here. If you have a different definition, it's okay. We're not giving you a formal definition. We just want to set the pace for our discussion. But anything that's setting a longer-term direction, typically more than 2 or 3 fiscal years, is a decent strategic planning focus of today's fast-moving environments. But we usually would like to think that if your capital planning environment is 10 years, then your strategic planning environment should be 10 years. If you're a service organization, you could probably have a much shorter and much quicker changes in your industry, which provide you to have a shorter, longer-term plan. Typical planning models that you might have seen in your organization, and this is the plan that we're trying to create, is you have a number of inputs that create a set of goals, and those goals cascade through the organization. Strategic alignment is getting those to the right places at the right time and making sure that we can achieve them. So on your left of your screen, you see the deployment process. And that is communicating what the goals are, aligning resources to them, making sure that they're broken down into smaller components and annual goals, making sure that the initiatives, projects, or tasks that are carried out are actually carried out. So those are the things that we do in terms of deployment. Lack of alignment, meaning we can deploy initiatives and tasks and projects, but they may not be aligned with these strategies which come from your vision, your mission, your policy, and your values. So there's 2 components we want you to think about. One is we have a process to deploy things, breaking it down into the organization. And second, it's aligned to what they want to achieve. And often we see 1 or 2 of those out of whack. Either we have the right goals and don't deploy them well, or we deploy the wrong goals because people thought those were the right goals. So what we're trying to do is get deployment and alignment all in sync. And what I'd like you to do is, based on my quick definition there, answer this question for us, and also tells me you know how to stay awake here. Does your organization have a strategic plan? If so, do you understand what it is and where you fit in? So that's a multiple question here, but and it doesn't have to be a well-documented 30-page or 300-page document. It means, does your leadership articulate a strategic direction and have a plan to achieve it? And the second part of that is, do you understand how you fit into that plan? And that's pretty good. I'm glad to see you all have plans, and hopefully that one no vote didn't come from my staff. Otherwise, we'll be in kind of trouble here. Okay, so if we continue in our thought process that strategic planning is a future direction and there's a planning model that you might be using, here's how effective this has been, and here's some tidbits of information that might be useful to you. One of the failures of carrying out that plan is that there's a lack of tracking performance. Less than 15% of companies make it regular practice to go back and compare the business results. The assumption there is that we have systems in place that monitor that for us. And the reality is, if you don't have some physical time, either monthly or quarterly, and we recommend quarterly for strategy, a review against your plan, you really don't know how well you're doing. Some things cross multiple quarters in performance, some multiple years. So you do need to have some status report. A typical business unit, the board should be monitoring fewer metrics than they typically are. Many organizations get so bogged down, one of the reasons they don't track performance is too many things they're tracking, and they get kind of tired of that. Third, only about 63% of the financial performance that their strategies promise are actually achieved. And that usually result. Now you could say, well, the goals were too high, but generally it means that there was breakdowns in the planning and execution, and about a third of these placed that at about 50%. So pretty, would say, average achievement of their goals and strategies from a financial point of view. And lastly, whether you're a 10-person company or a 10,000-person company, very few of the average employees even understand their company's business strategies. And one of my mentors, and the way I learned about strategy, was from an executive from the Duracell Corporation. And this executive had a very clear strategy and strategic plan, so much so that he carried it in his back pocket, a folded up document. And no matter where he went in that organization, he never failed to pull that document out and talk about it. And I've, in my 25 years, have rarely seen an organization that had such high employee awareness of the direction. Interestingly, that same organization, within 3 years, he himself was rated as one of the top 5 best performing executives in the country. And the organization was very, very successful, later on being purchased by Gillette and then later Procter & Gamble. But that's what it took for him in his organization to make sure that people understood the direction of the organization. I also would like to share another story of 2 different organizations that basically thought they had their strategic direction licked and the employees knew about it. One was an organization that had posters and their vision statement stamped right on their helmets, their clothing, everywhere you could see it. And if you asked the average employee what their vision was, most people couldn't even articulate it. The other organization, you couldn't find their strategic direction written anywhere, but if you asked every employee what it was, they could tell you exactly. So this isn't about documentation, it is about understanding where we're going and articulating that to the organization. But if only 7% of your employees know where you're going, it's pretty hard to keep them going in the right direction. So we're going to just talk about strategic alignment, why it's so difficult, and how to improve it, which is your 3 secrets that you should get here today. If 9 out of 10 companies fail to execute their strategy, that doesn't mean they're failing as companies. It just means that if they believed that that strategy was going to get them in a better position, they might be missing out on some of that position. They might be missing out on their financial targets or cultural targets or market targets. One reason, misunderstanding. The workforce doesn't understand the strategy, so it takes longer to get things done. There's more arguing at the lower levels about what to do, and there's no real referee because the understanding isn't clear. And one thing a strategy is, it's a guide for managerial action. So if we have to spend money today to get us somewhere tomorrow, if we don't know where that tomorrow is, then the money spent today could be wasted. So if it's a guide to managerial action, we need to use that as our referee. Without that guide, it's pretty much anarchy. Secondly, the resources, and not just the people, but the money, the time, the IT systems, whatever it takes, have to be linked to that strategy, not delinked. And if you were to ask yourself, identify 5 to 10 initiatives or tasks your organization is doing that if they stopped doing today would have no impact on their performance. Those activities are not linked, because if they were, you wouldn't get rid of them and they wouldn't be unnoticed. And they also probably are still being budgeted, but they don't have to be. So if we fail to execute a strategy, one reason is the resources are misaligned or going down the tubes on things that aren't really helping the organization. A key area of failure is that the reward and structures that most employees have is not incentivized by the strategy. In other words, we reward for today's behavior, but not tomorrow's behavior. It's a difficult issue when it comes to an organization that's a publicly traded company that's trying to meet quarterly results. But some of the best companies who meet quarterly results and are public also have very long-term successes. Why? Because when you look at the components of the reward system, there's a large component of today and tomorrow. If you don't have anything in it about tomorrow, it's a pretty good chance they're just going to be rewarded for what's happening a very short period of time. And the last one is the lack of attention given to the longer-term reward, recognition, and review process. For those of you who might be in an ISO 9000 environment, there is a management review process that's in there. If you are monitoring yourselves with a Baldrige process, there's a management review process. The reason it's there is that the lessons learned, the successful companies who engage their leadership in reviewing, in this case, their plan and deployment of that plan, have a much greater chance of achieving it, because they know if they're going in the wrong direction, they can make changes, and if they're going too slow, they can make changes. But if you're only spending an hour a month talking about strategy, it's pretty good understanding why people aren't getting the direction. Hence, going back to my executive from Duracell, he made sure that there was more than an hour being spent a month because he would remind people every single day. So from strategy, we have deployment. And deployment means subdividing long-term into short-term. And that means breaking them down into annual goals, which creates an annual plan, establish responsibility, identify the actions, resources, etc. The key success factor in establishing responsibility is historically we established responsibility with our org chart. Head of sales deals with sales. Head of product development deals with development. Head of quality deals with quality. And although that structure is good about managing people, it's not very good about managing across those functions in processes. And so when we establish responsibility, we establish some that are driven by the local goals, but others that are through the improvement initiatives such as your Lean, Six Sigma, business process management. The establishing responsibility to a project team is a form of management that cuts across functions, and if we have both management of function and management of cross-function, we're going to have a better chance of achieving our subdivided goals. In the absence of the structure for team-based projects, we assume that the functions will just work it out, but they don't. And a lot of us on this call are all in the process improvement world, and we know that the best projects are those that are aligned to the business, have responsibility in the form of a leader, a team, some methods, and some review process, and even some certification process. So deployment is the breakdown of that. Alignment is making sure that as we break it down, we're still in sync with the actions we are trying to get to, or the goals we are trying to get to. And so we're trying to bring the organization's divisions and people in line with the planned objectives. So visually, we are all moving at least in a similar direction and not in a dissimilar direction. And at some point, we're actually all moving very much in sync with each other. Now, you can imagine if one or two of these rowers are out of sync, in this case, the direction of the boat is going to go side to side. It could go slower. And so as we align everybody and get everybody on board, we're all moving at the best, fastest pace we can. So let me pause. Secrets are coming. Another poll. Just giving you an opportunity to quit and get off the call if this is not meeting your mark. But if this is the subject that you came for, I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Also, we have a number of people, about a third of the folks today are from healthcare. And I'd like to make a point of no matter what industry you're in, a strategic plan is going to be useful and helpful and needed. What may be different is what your goals are based on your industry. Some industries are fighting on a cost basis, some industries are fighting on a quality basis, some industries are fighting for their industry. So your strategy may be very different, but the strategic planning and deployment and alignment process would be the same. Well, I'm glad to see nobody put no. Feel better that the people who picked our title, Scott and Pete, got it right. So why is something like this so difficult? Well, most organizations, if they get up over 10 people, is very hard to manage change. And I tell people, you don't have to be 10,000 people and have difficulty with change. I come from a very large Italian family. It only takes about one or two of our family members to create chaos for the rest of us. So it doesn't take a lot, but inability to manage that change. And most of the inability to manage that change means you don't have the right structure in place to manage it. You don't have the right resources placed in there. And so you have to actually create that. That resource and structure we call infrastructure. And the project-by-project improvement programs that are so popular are popular for a reason. That if you think about an organization that makes products, they have a product development department. And that department has a leader with trained people in their methodology of design, development, and whatever technology they are. They are tied to their sales process because they're trying to create future products for future revenue. They have a review process, how they're doing, and they're engaged by all the functions to make sure that we have lifeblood in the system. In other words, there is management structure in place. But what about those non-product things? How well we invoice the client, how well we collect our payments, how well we hire and retain employees. These are things that don't necessarily have that same ownership. So the infrastructure is there and put in place to create that ownership. We assign projects to teams because the team now owns that portion of it. But assigning teams across functions requires some structure. So we have steering committees or quality councils, regular review process, champions, leaders, team members, subject matter experts. That's the infrastructure which comes along with training, review process, reward, recognition. It's a parallel system that helps us get over things that cut across and are very much important to the customer. We just assume that everything can get managed top to bottom, but as you know, it cannot. Not involving the right people at the right time. Japanese use the term policy deployment or Hoshin planning when it comes to, or Hoshin Kanri when it comes to strategic planning. And one of the tenets of Hoshin Kanri is something called catchball. And catchball means you get a bunch of people in the room and you literally have a ball in your, if you had a ball in your hand and I get that ball, I look at it, I touch it, and I throw it to John. John looks at it, plays with it, throws it to Jane. And if that ball were a set of goals or direction, basically I take a look at the ball, I make some changes, I throw it to John, John makes some changes, he throws it to Jane, Jane makes some changes, throws it back to me, I like it. In other words, we play catchball until we're comfortable with what we have. Catchball happens when you involve the right people at the right time. So often our strategies based on a small group of people in a room that do not play catchball. Therefore, the communication is not very good, the execution is not very good, and sometimes even the direction is not good. So most organizations that are trying to do a good job of strategic planning and deployment will have catchball sessions. They will bring groups of people together to challenge the leadership's plan, to provide more guidance, direction, and even conflict. I saw one organization create two teams. one that had to basically beat up the strategy, and the other one had to make it sound better than it was. And they came together and they found some really interesting things. Involving the right people at the right time doesn't mean taking the whole organization through a catch-ball session. It means at each level we pass it down to the next one and they have a chance to throw it back with some flavor on it. Similar to a capital equipment budget process, except this has long-term value to it. So what we want to do is try to seek a perspective of a wider group of people and involve them in the planning. And the belief is if we involve them in the planning, we're going to get a better plan, and we're going to get better communication of the plan and less resistance to the plan when we carry it out. Another reason why it's difficult, misalignment between what leadership actions are and the long-term direction. Even though I mentioned that two different companies, one had their strategy and direction printed on everything, but the actions of management were going in a very different direction. And therefore, they did what management said and guided them, not what was on the walls. And so often as an auditor, we go through buildings, we look at the walls, we ask questions, and they say, oh, that's not our strategy, we're going this way. That's misalignment. It's best to take everything off the wall and have one less issue to deal with. Employees will always observe their leaders and pick up signals. The average person will pick up signals. For instance, if quality is important, they will see their leadership participate in quality activities. If efficiency is important, they'll pick up on that, and efficiency is important. If both are important, they'll figure out how to balance it. So often, without an infrastructure, there may not be very much coordination. Even a strategic plan needs an owner and needs process owners to help coordinate the deployment of it. If you don't have any organization-wide deployment, then as it gets lower into the organization or it gets broader into the organization, people no longer have that connectivity to what we should be working on, and everything looks good. So if we want to ensure decisions and actions are coordinated with these beliefs and goals of the organization, then we need to put in accountability. Accountability comes from the structure we put in place. The same structure we have for functions, we need for cross functions. Another way to look at strategic alignment, if we look at the pyramid, is that the top sets direction and deploys goals. And as we move down the pyramid, the daily activities we execute through our managed processes. But it's in that middle zone there that alignment and deployment get messed up. For instance, if we don't have organized initiatives, we may have initiative overload. We may pick the wrong initiative. If we have too many projects, too few projects, we may not go fast enough. We may go too slow. So it's important that your structure includes all these elements. And if we look to the pink center section, the output or input of each of those is we begin with the voice of the customer and voice of the business. That helps us set direction. We then play catchball, or we do some form of deployment, and that is breaking down the goals into sub-goals. We then align the initiatives, and those are the teams and the plans to those initiatives and to the goals that we've established. Someone just asked the question, should we do catchball quarterly? Catchball is done when you set the strategy, and usually it's in multiple sessions month by month for a quarter or a half a year. But once you're in the mode, we believe a quarterly review process, not necessarily a quarterly catchball process. From the aligned plans, we continuously review, and as you notice, one of the difficulties is that management does not review it well enough, according to Harvard Business Review, and then the methods. And so if we looked at voice of the customer, a good strategy comes from outside in. We know what's going on in the marketplace. We know what we think is going on out there in the future. We look at our satisfaction and loyalty of our current customer base. We look at our growth and what we think we can do in the future, and we then establish that vision or direction. The Hoshin planning basically takes that top-level stuff and breaks it down. And that breakdown could be done by business unit, it could be done by product line, it could be done by time-based. It's just something to break it down to smaller bite-sized parts. And that catchball that happens between the upper management and middle management, then middle management, then the average employee, comes down through their aligned goals and plans in their departments, in their projects. And so let's say that I'm a black belt in an organization. I'm only a black belt because I'm given a role to participate on a project team that is going to help me achieve my company local goal, business goal, long-term goal. I don't exist for any other reason. So I'd better be aligned by working on the right projects at the right time. As we move through our performance plans, we have to review them regularly. So a lot of the scorecards that you may have, or balanced scorecards, they shouldn't just be balanced for financial or efficiency. The word balance means it's balanced for the metrics that are important to run the business successfully, and that includes short and long term. And so often we see red, yellow, green stoplight metrics that look good in the short term, but if you don't look at them over the long term, you may not see where you're going. You might be going off track. And then, so the management reviews are very, very critical. And then the methods are those things we do to drive process, whether they're DMAIC, Six Sigma, business process management, quality by design, lean, root cause analysis. These are methods that we use to manage or improve process or even design process. And so if we said that we want to be we want to deliver our services to our customer in 24 hours, 12 hours ahead of the closest competition, and that's what's going to win us in the marketplace, there's the direction, and it's a long-term goal. The short-term goal might say, let's get us to 28 hours by the end of this year, 24 by the end of next year. Some of the day-to-day activities that we would do in our management would be one thing, but implementing initiatives to help us get there would be another. Then we'd review those initiatives, we'd review the plans, and then we'd make changes to the process. So as we do these things, we are in better alignment. Not doing some of these things would cause you to be out of alignment. So if you think about how it all fits together, if we set direction, deploy the direction, implement these tasks, initiatives, solutions, and review and manage it, we should be okay. But we know when we implement solutions, we are going to have a gap. In other words, there's a gap between the deployed direction and where we currently are. And that gap can be closed through these methods that we just mentioned, and I'm sure you have some other of your own methods. But closing the gaps helps us continue on the planning. And if we close the gaps fast enough, long enough, then we're going to get to a successful execution of that strategy. And people talk about Toyota and that their strategy has been the best car manufacturer in the world. Well, they're not the only one that is targeting the best car manufacturer in the world. General Motors, Ford, Toyota, Hyundai, they are really either close behind or even better in some categories. They're executing strategies as well. So what you want to have is a strategic direction for you that either leads the pack, keeps you ahead of it, or differentiates you enough that your successful execution actually gets you somewhere better than you were and better than your competitor. We like to look at alignment this way. I'm going to pull down a simple, there we go. Okay, so there's my little arrow there. I think you see it. So over time, we're working in this direction. We have very high-level strategies, shorter sub-goals, possibly annual goals, or even quarterly goals, and then all these projects and initiatives. If these are completed and are selected based on hitting these, and we hit these over time, we're going to keep moving in this direction. So lack of alignment means we do these day-to-day things that are not getting us to these goals. Or we did not really understand the goals and we're implementing solutions that'll take us in a different direction. So alignment means we at least could draw this picture and say, we have a vision, we have a long-term direction, we have broken it down, and we have all these projects. So our goal is to manage these projects. And projects result in process changes, which then get managed day to day. And if you were on our last session last month, by self-control, self-paced work teams, but the daily work that gets done. So strategic alignment, everything is in alignment, where it comes from. So here we go. Let me just make sure that I didn't blow it here on this poll. Okay, I'm going to go back here. Um, okay, so strategic planning is the process by which we create this picture, basically. Strategic deployment is we then take this picture and we start to get people to understand it and participate in it and carry it out. Strategic alignment means we constantly review it to make sure that we are all doing the same thing over time. So hence the three secrets. I'd like you all right now just to start singing the Beatle version of Do You Want to Know a Secret? And if you raise your hand right now, I know that you're actually singing along with me. You first, thank you. Okay, good job. You can even sing it in multiple languages, because if I recall, this song was sung in a couple of languages by the Beatles. So 1, collaboration. If you want to have a better strategic planning process, play catchball. Catchball means getting leaders and sub-leaders, the next level, in a room, and you discuss where you're going, how you're getting there, and before you leave that room, you get input from those folks. Those folks in that room now take it, go back to their team, they do the same thing, and if there's any changes, come back and we do it. And if we do that 3 times, we're going to have a much better chance of being at least all agreed that this is a pretty good place to go, our long-term view. So collaboration builds not only the direction, but also says, I'm part of the communication process now, and I'm going to go get things done. It also creates condition for people to work together. I think it's just way too difficult to try to establish a direction when you don't have anybody on board with you. And we can also establish the collaboration through structure. So we can set up teams, we can organize those teams. You already have some teams. Part of the time of a regular department should be, let's review our progress to the strategy of the organization. How are we doing? And goals are what we work to. So what we collaborate initially on are the goals. And one input we give to the goal makers is, what is our process capability? So if we're trying to cut our time in half, we're trying to make twice as much product 50% faster or cheaper, then we have to let them know that that's going to require a major change. So it's really goal setting and understanding our capability, because that creates the gap, and we collaborate on what to do about that gap. The second item is communication. And I will relinquish the name of that executive. His name was Robert Kidder. And Bob Kidder could not rely on the formal communication method, so he always relied on his own. He would drive you nuts with his strategy, but he did it in such a way that everybody knew where he stood every day, and we all went in the same direction. In the absence of that leader who can do that, we need to create mechanisms to over-communicate the vision as long as we are deploying it and aligning it. We're not talking about hyping it and marketing it. We're saying once we collaborate, once we play catchball, we need to communicate how we're doing over time as well. So we create communication strategies, review sessions, so that we make sure that the message constantly gets out there. And early in one of my slides, I said when we ask the employees what their role is in helping the strategy get met, if 9 out of 10 of your employees can answer that question, then you know you're making some progress. I believe the Baldrige Award criteria, they ask employees a question about strategy, and if X% of them respond the same, there's a way of knowing that the organization is actually making progress and actually has a really clear, understood strategy. And that only happens through constant communication. And the third one is that you hired Duran Institute. No, not really. You could, but that's not the one we're talking about. The 3 R's, regular reporting and review. And we're using the word regular because someone asked weekly, monthly, quarterly. You know, it depends on your industry. It depends on how fast your industry moves and your marketplace moves. But generally speaking, if you have a 3 to 5 year plan, You should review that 2 or 3 times a year by leadership. If you have a 12-month plan, then you should review it on a monthly basis. So monthly is too much for a strategic plan. Quarterly and twice a year is probably sufficient. Doing nothing is a problem. So we would like you to have regular reporting, regular review of that. And so this is where a lot of the performance management systems come in, where you're doing some real significant alignment of reward recognition, bunch of R's there, reward recognition, management review, management walkthrough, Gemba walks, whatever it takes to see how we're doing, and then using that information to tweak or redirect our efforts. They should be scheduled, and like every other important meeting, we like to look at it like a board meeting. Schedule regular reviews for our strategy development or strategy discussion, and it should come at least every year, but at least twice a year is better. Create and use the plans to create gaps again, and a lot of organizations don't completely understand the variables of the future. So there are times we have to change direction. That means maybe killing an initiative, killing a project, because somebody came out with something in the meantime. So it also can affect your initiatives and projects, and therefore create new plans. It'll also encourage leaders to identify problems and barriers sooner rather than later. So often we wait till the end of the year and we say, oh yeah, if we did this earlier, we would have had a problem. So regular reporting and review is a must, and if you schedule it, then it'll encourage people to raise them sooner rather than later. So with that, we're all going to sing a Billy Kramer rendition of Do You Want to Know a Secret? And if there's any British people out there, let's raise your hands. Let's see if we have any Brits out there who know who Billy J. Kramer is. How about anybody? We've got some education to do here. So before I conclude, I have another poll for you. There we go. Okay, folks, we're getting close to our conclusion. It's 45 minutes, and this helps my ego out tremendously. If you'd like to know more about the topic, you're welcome to contact us. We will contact you. We try not to bother you too much, but anything we can do to help would be useful to us and hopefully to you. With the diverse group of people that have attended this webinar, we'd love to hear from you as you depart today or in the future, and let us know how we're doing, and let us trying to get the rest of my staff to actually present these. They keep coming back to me to do them, and I love doing them. But I'd like to thank you all for attending our webinar today. And in the next few days, you're receiving a special offer related to this webinar. We found that the more we keep you involved, the better off we both are. Also, as Scott said earlier, a copy of this presentation would be available. We'll be sending you a link to that. If you need more information, you can contact us. And because there are a group of healthcare professionals on the line, we'd like you to know that we're conducting a joint Duran-Christiana Care hospital system Lean Six Sigma workshop in December and in January down in Delaware. If you'd like to participate in that, you can contact us. And in closing, you're always welcome to drop me a line, and you're also welcome to schedule a 30-minute session with me, which go about 90 minutes long, by contacting Tina. And I'd like to thank any of you and all of you for your participation today. And I see your names and I look at who you are, and some of you have been around a long time. Thank you for coming back, and hope to see you in the future. And I will turn this over to Scott to see who our winners will be today. Let's pick 3, Scott.
Sure. Well, before we do that, Joe, we have a couple of questions that came in. If you can answer those in a couple of minutes. Here's a question for you. We are in the 90% of organizations that are great at developing strategy but never seem to get anything executed. Yet our executive team seems to not be able to focus on this issue. If you were meeting with my executive team, what would you tell them that would shake them up enough to get them to do things differently?
Wow. Well, the first thing I would ask you in preparation for that is how successful and how is your organization performing? Because if your organization is performing very well, then their strategy might be right. There just might be a disconnect in how fast they want to go. But I'm going to play with you here and say, okay, assuming you're right and that your organization is not performing, then what the outside consultant typically does is try to show them where they are failing and what the rest of the organization thinks about them. And so often there is a disconnect between the top leadership and the typical middle management where these things tend to happen from. And sometimes I'm one myself, the CEO and the C-suite sometimes don't understand or don't see things the way you do. And as we said before, they think in the terms of money, you think in the terms of things. So what we would try to do is try to get them to understand clearly what is the loss that they're having as a result of not hitting their strategy or deploying it properly, if they are indeed losing. But if they are winning, then we would direct them to, hey, you're winning, but people don't think your strategy is being deployed, so something's wrong, so you'd better address that. Because what will happen is, once again, the actions are stronger than the words, and so people are following the actions, but the words are not clear, so go back and change the words to match the actions. So I hope that helps. I think the key to my response to them will be get more information from you, understand their performance situation, and then respond. Because I will tell you, some organizations at the top are going in the direction they want to go, and the rest of the organization is just tagging along. And that might be where they want to go. I think what you're saying is at least tell us where you're going so we can go along with you.
All
Anything
right, I
else,
have
Scott?
one more question. Yeah, I have one more question for you, Joe. You'll love this one. I've always known Duran as a quality improvement firm. Do you actually offer services to help with strategic alignment?
Interesting, when I joined Duran in 1988, I came in as the strategic guy because I had trouble with it where I was, and I learned about it, and the answer is yes. And not only do we don't pick strategy, we do like to encourage strategy based on high customer experience and good quality, but we do help deploy and align, and the answer is yes. And you'll be surprised how simple some of that can be, but it does have to be learned.
All right, now, before we announce our winners, our next webinar is scheduled for December 10th, Wednesday, December 10th, conducting successful deployment reviews. And so, and what are we giving away today, Joe? Are we giving away
Books,
books?
books, and more books.
Excellent.
Books,
All
books,
right.
and more
So
books.
our
By the
first,
way, the Business Leaders Essentials book has a very good chapter on strategic deployment and alignment. It's one of the 9 essentials. And for those of you who have been kind of coming to these webinars, we've been carrying out each of those essentials one by one. So we'll give away 3 of those books today.
excellent. Our first winner goes to Danielle Fink. So congratulations, Danielle. And
I'd love
our
to have
second
somebody sing, "Do you want to know a secret to win the book?"
Our second winner today is Kimberly Gamaro. I hope I pronounced her last name right. And our third winner is Randy McCluskey. So congratulations to the 3 of you. And Kimberly just sent a note in. Joe said, yes, thank you. So we got a happy person out there. And so again, it was Randy McCluskey, Kimberly, and I know our staff got our first one because I think it was Daniel Fink, if that's who it was, and I know staff grabbed those names, and we'll be following up with you to get you your prizes. So thank you, and hopefully we'll see everybody on December 10th. And somebody also asked whether this webinar is being recorded. The answer to that is yes. They generally get posted within a couple of days after the webinar. If you go to Duran.com and click on the resources link in the navigation, you'll see webinar archives. You can go back and listen to all of Joe's webinars right there on demand. And so don't hesitate to do that. In about 10 minutes, you'll get an email from somebody on staff. Tina on staff will send you an email that will have a link to this presentation so you can download the slide deck as well. So hopefully this has been worthwhile for all of you, and you picked up a good golden nugget or two. Good to have you here, and hopefully we'll have you back in the future. Thanks. Have a great day.